Okay, cool. I think we'll start. I hate these lectern things. I'm only just 5 foot something, so it's always a little bit dodgy whether people can see me or not. So I'm Emma Lindley. I'm from Innovate Identity. We're going to be moderating this track. We've got some really great speakers this afternoon, and we've got a really interesting panel. Today's track, the financial services track, is going to run over in tomorrow morning as well. So we've kind of split it into two things. So today's track, we're going to be talking more about the business of identity, and then tomorrow we're going to be touching more on financial services, technical and financial services. So all financial services, more business related today, and more technical tomorrow. Really great speakers. I'm going to introduce you to our first speaker. This is Dan Johnson. Dan is from the UK, but he is heading up, so he's head of identity services for HSBC globally. So he's got some really interesting presentation slides, and we're going to have some time for questions as well. So please hold fire on your questions, and then we'll come round afterwards. Dan, over to you.
Thank you, Emma. Hello, everyone. So as Emma says, I'm Dan Johnson. I'm from HSBC. Hopefully you've heard of us. I'm going to be doing my presentation in UK English. So if anybody needs any kind of translation, then just let me know, and maybe I can speak a little bit slower, and hopefully that's going to work for you. Thanks very much for inviting me here. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I've had a really warm welcome to Chicago. This is my first time in the city, and it's been absolutely fantastic. I had a history lesson from the taxi driver on the way to the airport, which was fascinating. So I'm really pleased to be here. So I'm going to start off by telling you a story. I find that's kind of the easiest way to really illustrate exactly what I'm talking about. So I want you to introduce you to somebody. This is Emily. She's from Troyes in France. She's a small business owner. She designs leather handbags and purses, and she has her own small shop. She started her business in her hometown. And through her reputation for fashion and quality, it spread really wide. You know, lots of people are kind of really interested in her products, and they're really, really good products. She also has a web store, and she sells and she ships her products online now to customers all over the world. Emily was invited to Chicago, which is kind of novel. And she was going to meet a fashion blogger and to advertise her latest range. So she went online to book her flights and also her hotel. And she used her credit card to pay for her hotel and to guarantee her accommodation. She's required to fill out all of her personal details on both the airline and on the hotel site. And then once she'd booked her hotel flights, she also had to provide her passport information for the airline, so her advanced passenger information, and then had to do it all over again to apply for her visa. At the airport, Emily checks in. She shows the clerk her passport and her visa along with her e-ticket. She makes her way through security, and then she stops off at the duty-free store because she wants to buy some sweets for the flight and she pays for this using her credit card. She has to show her passport and her boarding card in order to complete the transaction. Unfortunately, though, Emily's flight was delayed by a couple of hours, but she found a lounge that she could check into online, so she fills in her details online and then pays for some time in the lounge using her credit card. She shows up at the lounge, and she's then required to present her passport and also her boarding card. Eventually, Emily's flight is called for boarding, and the wait wasn't really so bad. She managed to catch up on some emails in the lounge, and she treated herself to a glass of champagne too, and she was absolutely flattered when the barman asked her for identity to prove her age. At the gate, the flight attendant checked Emily's boarding card and also her passport, and then she made her way onto the plane and settled down into a seat. This particular flight had Wi-Fi facilities, so she fills in all of her details on her mobile device, and rather than watching movies, wants to kind of catch up on some emails, and connected to the Wi-Fi again, providing her personal details and then paying for all of the service with her credit card. Finally, Emily lands at O'Hare Airport. She queues up through immigration. She shows her passport and visa to the nice lady at the desk. And she's really pleased that her bags were first off the carousel. And then Emily jumps in a cab. I understand that you don't see these cabs so much anymore. I think they look kind of cool. You should bring them back, definitely. So she jumps in a taxi and heads for the hotel. She didn't take any cash out, though, unfortunately. So she's really pleased that the cab accepted her card. At the hotel, she queues up at the reception and is then asked for her passport when checking in. And then also she needs to provide her credit card to cover any extras while she's staying there. So Emily's here. She's not here. I just made her up, but she's. So I was going to. It would be even better, wouldn't it, if I just said, Emily, come up to the stage. She's all set for her meeting with a fashion blogger, but first up, she wants to enjoy Chicago. Okay. So credit cards have been around for over 100 years now. The first cards could only be used at the businesses that issued them, and they had limited locations where they were accepted. In the 1950s, the mass market for credit cards were created, Diners Club and American Express being examples of the plastic cards that we still carry around today. Over the years, the credit card system has evolved from a closed-loop system into, broadly speaking, an open system. No one that Emily undertook a payment transaction with needed to know that her bank was trustworthy. They accepted the payment because it was authorized by the technology. No one that Emily undertook a payment with needed to perform their own checks on any of that data. She authenticated using the means approved by the credit card scheme. No one that Emily paid worried about whether they could accept the currency of the card. All of that is dealt with in the back end. The card payments industry, as we know, has evolved over the years, and it continues to do so. It's certainly not perfect. Fraud runs at around $22 billion a year, but that's against $32 trillion of volume. So, relatively speaking, it's not bad. So let's have a look at Emily's journey. So during her journey, she used her passport, which is her entitlement to travel across national borders, to prove her identity many times. So during our journey, we kind of explained that she's continually producing her passport over and over again with lots of different people. Each time her passport was used, the quality of the checks that were done on that data relied entirely on the person that was doing those checks, and also on the information that they had in their possession to check that data against. Each time her passport was used to check her identity or validate her entitlement, Emily was required to provide the same information over and over again. The people doing the checking did the same checks, though to varying standards. And the information that Emily provided was often more than that should be required for her to access the products and services that she wanted. So each time she's presenting her passport or documentation, there's a lot of information on those documents that really the consuming person or relying party doesn't really need to see. But unfortunately, it all kind of comes as a package, so everybody gets to see everything. Digital identity could be used to greatly improve Emily's journey, allowing her to assert previously attested information in a secure and convenient manner. Emily could have used a digital identity to prove who she was and what she was entitled to by authenticating and then sharing the relevant information with the other party for the purpose they needed it. There's a great opportunity to transform the business processes that we all transact with each and every day. To do that, we need to stop competing and start collaborating. Technology will enable digital identity solutions though that technology stack needs to be interoperable. There is no one single answer. Standards that define outcomes, not solutions, are required to allow for different implementations in different countries that have equivalents. And governments have a key role to play, though this should be in partnership with the private sector to allow for compelling, customer-focused propositions to be developed. So, we need a trusted identity scheme that's globally interoperable, which is standards-based, is endorsed by government, and delivered by the market. So this is an identity conference, right? So we know this. So the key question, I think, really is, well, why haven't we got it already? I mean, it's obvious, right? The customer journey that I just outlined is really kind of painful, but we all, many of us actually went through that same process in order to be here today. And we continue to do that, and we know that there is a simpler way of doing this, a much better way using digital identity. So what is stopping us from doing it? Okay, so let's go through this. So a trusted identity scheme, and kind of thinking about this in the context of the financial sector. We need regulatory change so that we can accept data without necessarily having to check that data. And out of that kind of spins a requirement for a liability model. So when things go wrong, and it's not if, when things go wrong, who's culpable? How is it going to work? What happens when bad actors get introduced into the system? Who's culpable for that? At the moment, it's fairly clear. So banks have fairly clearly, or well-defined liability model. That new model needs to be created in order to allow for digital identity to work successfully in the financial sector. So a globally interoperable system. So there are many identity schemes all around the world. So NSTIC is evolving in the US. We have SecureKey in Canada. We have Aadhaar in India. Gov.uk Verify in the UK. BankID in Norway and Sweden. We have NemID in Denmark. We have MyInfo in Singapore. So we have a large number of identity schemes. Some of them are federated, some of them are distributed, some of them are centralized. The key thing about all of them is that they are all government-backed. So those that are government-run, so Aadhaar, for example, and then there are others that are private sector-run, but fundamentally, that identity is able to be used not only for access to government services, but it's done in such a way that creates consumer trust in the way that the government data is, or that the identity is used, because it is endorsed by the national government. Standards-based. So fundamentally, we need a set of rules and a set of standards that allow us to be able to consume that data and fundamentally not have to check that data against other sources. So if we consume identity and consume all of the attributes, we don't want to have to then go ahead and do all of our own checks on that data. Otherwise, we've just added to our already existing workload. Government endorsement. So as I was saying earlier, fundamentally, that's absolutely critical in order to increase customer trust. Customers or identities, individuals and organizations, need to be able to know that their identity is safe, that it is being used, trusted, and consumed by organizations following a set of schemes, standards, and rules, and need to know fundamentally that they're safe. If they don't, individuals and organizations are not going to provide their identity, and it's not going to be available to be consumed. Governments have a significant role to play in increasing that customer confidence. Also, the governments need to work very, very hard together on interoperability. So fundamentally, you should be able to take an identity created in the US, for example, and then open a bank account in the UK. You shouldn't need to have to prove residency. You shouldn't need to have to turn up at a branch in the UK in order to open that account. You should be able to assert your identity, your US identity, in the UK, providing that the UK government trusts the US government and vice versa. I won't get drawn on a political debate on that one. And then again, governments have a significant role to play in helping with the regulatory change that would be required in order to fully support digital identity. And then the last point, delivered by the market. So this is kind of crucial, really. A lot of the focus at the moment has been on providing identity. There are lots of identity providers. There aren't so many identity consumers. So the governments tend to be the only relying party for identity. So you create your identity, sometimes in the private sector, and then you can use that identity in order to access government services, so to pay your taxes or to check your driving license and so on. The key push here really needs to be to make it much, much more compelling for individuals and organizations to create an identity. So if you can use that identity to open a bank account, to buy a product online, to check that you are old enough to drink in the establishment that you're going to. I don't know about you, I get asked for ID all the time. You know, it would be nice if I could just assert my identity without having to provide my driving license, for example, which not only contains my actual date of birth rather than just the fact that I'm old enough to drink. I am old enough to drink. But it also contains my name, my full address, my driving entitlement. So this is information I don't really want to be sharing with a barman. So the delivered by market really is where particularly banks come in, and equally where I think HSBC come in. Our role really is to define a set of tangible use cases that we can actually deliver in order to consume identity so that we can start to make this journey easier. As a result of doing that, we're going to be able to identify any problems with the creation of a liability model. We will drive out a commercial model. And we will create and knit together all of the technology required. And mostly that technology exists. It's just really a question of stitching it together. Obviously, my technology guys tell me that it's a lot more expensive than that. Stitch it all together in order to create a solution and evolve as we go, much in the same way as the card payments services have done. This, in turn, will create a wonderfully sticky consumer experience where customers come back time and time again. They won't be forgetting their credentials. They will be able to use the same credentials across multiple industries and in every walk of life and in everything that they do, which is going to help with our behavioral data analytics as well. So we're going to be able to see patterns in how consumers are operating and how they're working, which means that we can help to keep identities safer. Digital identity needs to rapidly catch up with the cards payments industry and link cards to reduce fraud in both. That's pretty much the end of my presentation. I would really like to take some questions. I would point out I am quite limited in the questions that I can answer, but I will tell you if I can or I can't answer the question. Thank you very much for listening. I'll take your questions. I'm not sure that's on, but I think I heard. We're going to try another one. Or you can come up here. This one works.
He wants to know what's in it for the bank.
Okay. So thank you. Well, there's quite a lot in it for the bank, really. So fundamentally, customers are disappointed with the customer experience, particularly when it comes to onboarding. So I don't know how many of you have opened a bank account recently. I haven't done it in a little while. It's not a great experience, particularly if you're trying to open an account overseas. So if you look at most bank flows now, you can sometimes create an account entirely online, but that really requires that you have a significant amount of data available about you, particularly through credit bureaus. and then you can open an account. But if you're trying to open an account overseas, then you generally need to come into the branch. And that means that you need to provide paper-based documents. It means that we need to provide a bank clerk to then go through those documents. It then means we need to take a copy of those documents and then store them in files. Then when we store them in files, either digitally or physically, we then need to get those out each time we do a periodic review in order to make sure that nothing has changed. And all of that maintenance, all of that effort costs the bank a lot of money to do, but also is a horrible user experience. So we can delight customers by doing the things that we really should be able to do really well, which is sell and provide innovative banking products in order to solve life problems and life goals, and then also significantly reduce cost. Does that answer your question?
I have sort of the other half of that question. What about the risk to the bank? Right? You're doing financial transactions. You have some very complicated models to offset the risk that you might take during the transaction for a normal bank. But
Is this on now? Yeah. So in an identity transaction, how do you create a risk model that protects your end of the transaction and therefore makes the people in the higher suites of the bank feel safe about providing this service that they're not necessarily making direct monies from?
So I think what you're talking about there is what I referred to earlier as the liability model. Is that right? So it's something that hasn't been worked out yet. It's something that does need to be worked out, and that really kind of justifies at least for me, justifies my statement earlier that everything that I just described is obvious, right? We should have this stuff, and it should be available now. But there are a couple of reasons why we don't have it, and one is solving that liability model. And part of the reason why we haven't got to solving the liability model is that we are looking at this from a supply perspective as opposed to a demand perspective. So we know how to create identity. We know what it means. We know how to prove that you are you. We know how authentication should work. We can do all of that stuff. What we haven't figured out is what are the risks involved in consuming that data and effectively outsourcing the identity provision. That's the bit that we really need to work on. And the way to do that is to identify specific use cases and then start to work on consuming that identity. Does that answer your question? Somewhat.
How do you see that affecting uncounted or unidentified people throughout the world, especially in the third world where identity is not something that exists for a large majority of people in the Philippines and Bangladesh and various other places? They're born, they live, they die, there's no record.
True. It's going to be certainly particularly difficult. So a lot of the way that identity provision is done at the moment is by correlating data against trusted sources. The same thing applies in first world nations as well. So there are a large number of people, so the unbanked, who don't have credit history. They never had credit. They don't have bank accounts. They don't have a huge amount of information about them. And so providing an identity, a digital identity entirely online is particularly challenging. There are lots of ways that are being proposed to solve that problem. One in particular is social identity. So even people who don't have data about them do know people that maybe also don't have data about them. But that can help to correlate a position that somebody is who they say they are. So if I had no data about me, I've already said that my name's Dan Johnson, so I'm kind of restricted here really, but I could say I'm Bob. And at the moment I assert that I'm Bob, none of you have got any reason to say that I'm not. And if I can get somebody else to say, yeah, it's fine, he's Bob, then suddenly I become Bob. And that really is an identity. Now, you couldn't open a bank account on the strength of me just saying that I'm Bob, and also that somebody else is saying that I'm Bob. But you can start to correlate a picture of somebody, not necessarily using currently conventional means of sourcing data and correlating it.
Dan, we've just got time for one more question. I should say that Dan is on a panel later on today, so if you don't get a chance now, come back later on and ask that question then.
certainly making me work for my money.
Yeah, hi. You mentioned some of the large-scale global national ID programs that are out there, where in countries, and some of these are undeveloped countries, where they don't have good identity systems beyond the national ID, but in those countries they have biometrically backed national IDs. So people's identities are vetted for countries that have had these established for a long time from a very young age. The UK, Canada, the United States, which are three of the biggest markets right now, don't have national ID programs. We don't have reliable originating identity documents. So how, like this whole idea of really identifying someone or vetting someone's identity, knowing who they are to begin with to get them into the system is a big issue. So how are you addressing that in these countries in particular, and other places where you don't have that kind of system in place?
That's a big question. So how HSB, I can't really answer how HSBC are dealing with that. It's a good question. I may have to think about that one before I provide you with an answer. Perhaps if you can ask the question again on the panel, I will have thought about how to answer that question. Okay. Thank you very much.